Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Adam.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you. Although, if you're just kind of watching these videos in a row, I suppose, one after another, first of all, who would do that? But second of all, if you are, you wouldn't necessarily know there's been any sort of gap.
No.
But here we are. It's the first Wednesday in January that we're recording this of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So just for those out there in the interwebs, whether, who knows, that may be seeing this in a decade from now, that's when this is taking place.
I like your ambitions. I like your positivity.
Thank you. Well, welcome to Reading with the Pastor. I'm Adam. This is
Jacob.
That's right. And we're here at North Hills Church, and we're glad to have you with us. We're doing this discussion of Reading with the Pastor. I'm pro book cover, and so I would know that I was holding my book upside down.
Am I?
Because of that, Jacob's pro no. Which was a previous discussion. But tell me a book that you, from this past year in 2020 that you read that stands out to you for one reason or another.
Yeah, well, I just finished seminary this year, so I've had to read a lot of books, and one of them that I really enjoyed was The Imperfect Pastor by Zach Eswine. That one was really good, not just for people in ministry, but really for anyone, just talking about the heart of Jesus in ministry and our own pride and our own desires in ministry and how to bring those to the cross and seek to lift him up instead.
Excellent. And definitely a good book that I've read it previously and enjoyed, and I'm thankful for. A book that comes to mind for me this past year, and it was actually published back in the spring. It's called Christ and Calamity by Lutheran pastor Harold Sinkbull. Harold, if you're watching, I'm sorry if I just got your name wrong. But Christ and Calamity, it's a little paperback book, and it was written with the coronavirus in the background, but it really talks about calamity of all sorts, and it really shows us how Christ meets us in the midst of the calamity that we face in this world. So it was deeply encouraging, very honest, very real, but very encouraging. So that's one that stands out to me. And of course, if we had finished General Lilly, this certainly would be probably at the top of my list in terms of top books that I've read. But since I'm not finished with it, and we're not finished,
judgment is pending.
Yeah, it didn't make the list just yet, because I always include books that I've concluded.
Right.
But I think this will make the list this next year.
Yeah, it's been a good one.
So here we are in chapter 11, which is titled The Emotional Life of Christ, which is an interesting title for a number of reasons. One, do you think of Jesus as being emotional? And two, oftentimes when we say someone's being emotional, we use that as a negative. Mm-hmm. Stop being so emotional. Right? But there's something very interesting about the emotional life of Christ as Dana Ortlund, the author of this book, is drawing it out. And so it's encouraging in several different ways. Got me thinking and got me connecting with Christ, and then thinking about the way that I relate to the world around me. Mm-hmm. So that's our head, heart, and hands in brief. Of course, let's dig into it a little bit more. So what did this chapter get you thinking about?
Yeah, so one of the things he hits on in this chapter is Christ's emotional life in his humanity. Okay. In his divinity, we know that God, he has emotions, but he doesn't change. He's impassible. He remains the same forever. And yes, he has emotions, but especially in his humanity, Christ exhibited all the same emotions and emotional shifts that we do. He was compassionate. He got angry at times. And as we think about Christ now, I think we can have a tendency to forget that he's still human. That he is joined together as human, fully human, fully God for all time, for now and forever.
Yes, and Ortlund draws that out to make clear that Christ is still human.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? He is now the God-man, and he still he took on our flesh, and he still has that.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about Christ's nature and we think about that, it's it's important for us to know who he is, because all of what he's talking about in the rest of the chapter flows from this more theological understanding of Christ's nature and his divinity and humanity, and how those join together but aren't mixed or separated.
Right.
So.
And that does get into some difficult theological nuance at times, but it's incredibly important to get right, because as we look historically, and this is not what the chapter's about, but just a side note, a freebie, if you will, as we look historically, right, the heresies that have developed usually fall down in one or two ways.
Right, yeah.
Overemphasizing the humanity of Christ against the divinity, or overemphasizing the divinity of Christ against his humanity, or outright denying those things. So you mentioned compassion and anger, and those are the two emotions in particular that Ortlund draws out and speaks of, and I think that was a great balance. Right? We certainly might be apt to think of Jesus and his compassion more than his anger, but I think he's certainly known, at least in a couple of occasions, for his anger.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And people still, those things, whether they're people know all of the biblical storyline or all of the Gospels, they may think of Jesus turning the money-lending tables over, or driving out people out of the temples. That was...
telling the Pharisees and scribes, "You brood of vipers."
That's right. And so there was real emotion.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And I made that point about oftentimes we use someone being emotional as a negative, over-emotional. And certainly in our sin, we can wrongly respond to the world around us. But I think it should be noted, it's not just that we can sin in being too much. We can sin in not being enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, on one side of the spectrum, someone who has no emotions is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think we call those people pathological or psychopaths or that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. That in itself is not a good thing. So as we look to Christ and we see his humanity and we see his perfection in his humanity, then it is good and right for us to look at his emotions within the midst of that. It gives us a window into what we are called to be by God's grace and his goodness, and what his original intent was for us. So it definitely was good to think of through this chapter. I did like, he says on page 105, what does a godly emotional life look like? Mm-hmm. It is an inner life of perfect balance, proportion, and control on the one hand, but also of extensive depth of feeling on the other hand.
Yep.
And I really appreciated that way of framing it. I think that's very helpful and to look at. So this was a good chapter for me, just to think a little bit differently, a little deeper about Christ and his humanity, particularly in his the emotional expressions of compassion and anger. How were you encouraged in your own emotions, your own heart?
Yeah, I think one of the things that encouraged me as I was reading about this and reading about Christ's own emotional life is just recognizing that he feels the same things that I feel, in a sense, but without sin, obviously, and much deeper. And so when I'm upset about something, it's encouraging to remember that Christ is upset about the same things. I mean, as long as it's not a sinful thing I'm upset about, but when I feel anger or when I feel compassion, like that is an echo of Christ's emotions, or it should be, it can be.
Right.
Obviously, this is all prefaced with we're also sinful, and so oftentimes our emotions are wrong or tainted.
Sure.
But still, it's something to think about and remember. And Ortlund says it this way on page 112, which I really liked. He said, perhaps you have reason to be angry, perhaps you have been sinned against, and the only appropriate response is anger. Be comforted by this. Jesus is angry alongside you. He joins you in your anger. Indeed, he is angrier than you could ever be about the wrong done to you. Your just anger is a shadow of his. And as you consider those who have wronged you, let Jesus be angry on your behalf. His anger can be trusted, for it is anger that springs from a compassion for you. And so kind of just reminding me to, as I feel these emotions, as I feel these things, just to trust God. I mean, as the Lord says, vengeance is mine, whether I'm angry about whatever it may be, or worried, or any kind of emotion, really. he specifies anger, but it can be grief, it can be anything. And remember that I can leave that up to God and trust that He knows what I feel, feels it deeper than I feel, and knows the best response and is working that.
Yeah, that's good. And it certainly can and should be done with humility, recognizing, as you've said, that our emotions are going to be, tinged with our sin at best, right?
Yeah.
That it's going to be there, or is the word twinged? Tinged.
Yeah.
That just didn't sound right. Well, edit this part out for me later.
I might not.
Sometimes words, they just, I was looking at the word organ today.
Okay.
And it just did not look right. It's the amazing thing about words.
Yeah.
They're a beautiful thing. Well, anyway, yeah, at best, right?
Right.
But not the case with Jesus. Right. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And he had already, in this chapter, Ortlund had already clarified why anger could be right in circumstances, and why Jesus' anger was right. As he gets to the end, and that part that you just read, it's not without him having done that work, which I think was helpful. But yes, absolutely encouraging to know that Jesus is right there with us, and perfectly so.
Right, exactly.
Right? And so then I think where that leads us is a freedom to feel with humility.
Yeah.
Right? Humility enough to come before the Lord and to ask Him to search our hearts, to seek us and who we are, and to help us to see if there is a way that's not right within us. Right? And I'm paraphrasing very poorly Psalm 139, the very end of that. And then to move forward in how God leads us. Right. And so compassion is right. Anger may be right. The emotions that I have are God-given. And they will be God-perfected. And I have a picture of that now, don't I? In Jesus Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that to me is good. So this chapter really works together really well, I think, in all those ways. So
I definitely think so, yeah.
Anything else you want to throw out there?
No, I thought, like I said, I thought you've hit on a lot of good things. He hits on a lot of good things. One of the ways he does lay that groundwork, talking about how anger can be right, he does talk about. I think it's worth saying because it's encouraging too. He's talking about how Christ's anger stems from his compassion. Because he loves us, because he loves people. Yeah. When something happens against them, that leads to anger.
Okay. Yeah, he brings those together in a way that we have trouble with.
Oh yeah, of course. But we understand if we say we love our friends, we love our family, we love people, and if something happens to them, our love inspires that anger because we don't want something bad to happen because we love them, we have compassion on them.
And we would think there was something wrong, right? If you didn't react in that,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? So if someone hits you, right? Unjustly.
Yeah.
If you had it coming, but unjustly, as your friend, I should rightly be angry.
Right.
Right. And you could, of course, go much deeper with that with our, loved ones. Your loved one.
Well, yeah.
Man, this is really going off the rails.
Anyways, but it's a good chapter.
Yeah, it is. So definitely recommend the book, of course, and this chapter.
Yes.
This is, again, chapter 11 of Gentle and Lowly. And we thank you for joining us on this journey whenever you're doing that and however you're going about it. If you're reading along with us or following along, just listening and getting a picture of the content of this book, we're glad to have you. If you have feedback, as always, how can they let us know, Jacob?
You can email us at the email address that's about to pop up on the screen.
Thanks so much.